"Driver, kill the engine and step out right now." The words came fast, sharp, and louder than they needed to be. They carried the kind of urgency that didn't come from danger, but from a young officer who felt himself losing control before anything even happened. A second command followed, more frantic than the first. "Hands where I can see them! Do it now!" And then came a voice that was so calm, so steady, that it cut straight through the tension. "Young man," the voice said, "you are making a catastrophic mistake." There was no anger in it, no fear, just certainty, a stillness that didn't belong in a moment like this. Silence followed, not because anyone relaxed, but because the words landed harder than the officer expected. The scene fades to black, and text appears. "This is United States District Judge Nathaniel D. Harlan. In the next 7 minutes, the city of Chicago would lose $9.4 million, and 3 people would never be the same again." Before going into this story, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments so I can see how far this story reaches. And if you're here for the first time, subscribe to the channel and give me a like. It helps this story find the people who need to hear it. Judge Nathaniel Darius Harlan stood beside his car, finishing a call with his mother. His voice was gentle, the way grown children sound when they're reassuring a parent who's starting to slow down with age. "I'm on my way, Ma. I won't be long." He didn't mention the case that had drained him earlier that day, the case involving a teenager whose life ended because someone thought he matched a description. He didn't bring up the weight of it or the way the evidence sat heavy in his mind. He didn't tell her how much it reminded him of the day his own father never came home. He kept it simple because simplicity was easier for her now. He hung up, slid the phone into his pocket, and took a quiet breath, as if preparing himself for the rest of the night. Inside the store, Aaliyah Washington glanced out the window toward him. She wasn't reacting to anything he did. She was reacting to her own assumptions, shaped by years of hearing the same warnings from people who never had to question whether those warnings were fair. She picked up her phone, typed a message into her group chat, and waited for the replies. They came quickly. "That's suspicious. Be careful. Call it in." The friends who advised her didn't know the man. They didn't know his job, his history, the kind of authority he carried without ever raising his voice. They only knew what the moment looked like from a distance, and that was enough for them. It shouldn't have been. Aaliyah hesitated before calling. She told herself she was acting out of safety. She told herself she was following the training the store manager drilled into her about reportable behavior. She told herself she didn't want to be wrong, but she didn't let that hesitation stop her. She dialed. "There's a black male, maybe in his 50s, she said. "He's next to a black Mercedes GLE. He's been here a long time. He keeps looking around. I don't think the car belongs to him." She didn't state any threat. She didn't describe any crime. She simply described her discomfort and let the operator interpret it as suspicion. The call was logged as a possible stolen vehicle in progress. That phrasing changed everything. In another neighborhood, on another shift, with another dispatcher. It might have been logged as a non-emergency check, but Officer Kyle Thomas Brennan received it as a priority concern. He was already tense before he even arrived. His marriage had ended. His debts were growing. His confidence as an officer was cracking. He had been disciplined repeatedly, yet no one pulled him off solo patrol. He carried frustration like a second uniform, and when he heard the phrase, "possible stolen vehicle," he filled in the rest with his own assumptions. Kyle stepped out of his squad car with his hand already near his weapon. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't ask a question. He jumped straight into commands because commands made him feel secure. "Hands! Let me see your hands!" he shouted again. Though the judge wasn't resisting, he wasn't moving. He wasn't doing anything except turning his attention toward the officer. Judge Harlan watched the young man's posture, his trembling voice, the way his uncertainty turned into aggression. He studied him with the practiced eye of someone who had spent decades reading human behavior from the bench. "Officer," he said evenly, "lower your weapon and explain the stop." His tone wasn't defiant. It was instructional, the way a professor speaks to a student who skipped half the material but insists he knows the answer. But Kyle didn't hear instruction. He heard challenge. He heard disrespect. He heard all the fears he carried pushed back at him by someone he hadn't bothered to understand. "Possible stolen vehicle," Kyle said. "License and registration. Step away from the car." His words weren't procedural. They were defensive. A shield he used because he didn't know how to control the situation any other way. "You have no reasonable, articulable suspicion," Judge Harlan replied. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't use his authority as a weapon. He simply spoke the law, the very foundation the officer should have known well. Kyle flinched at the word suspicion, not because he understood it, but because it sounded like a reprimand. Judge Harlan reached slowly into his pocket and removed his wallet. He opened it with deliberate clarity and held it where Kyle could see. The gold federal judicial credentials were unmistakable, but what struck harder than the badge was the name. "Nathaniel Darius Harlan," he said calmly. "United States District Judge, Northern District of Illinois, you just conducted an unconstitutional stop on federal grounds. On camera. Stand down. Officer Brennan. That is an order." Those words landed like a hammer on glass. Kyle froze. His breath caught. His shoulders tightened. Everything in him locked into place. For the first time that night, he realized the magnitude of what he had done. But it was too late. The damage was already unfolding, and nothing he said or did now could stop the consequences that had already taken root. Judge Nathaniel Darius Harlan sat alone in his chambers earlier that evening, easing himself out of the black robe he had worn for more than 2 decades. The fabric carried a weight he felt more sharply on days like this one, days when he had just denied qualified immunity in a police shooting that should never have happened, days when the legal system he had dedicated his life to seemed to move too slowly for the families who entered his courtroom carrying grief instead of hope. He folded the robe carefully, the way his father used to fold his CPD uniform shirt, and placed it on the chair behind his desk. His clerk had already gone home. The building was nearly empty. He loosened his tie, pulled on his old gray Northwestern hoodie, and exhaled long enough to feel some of the day slip off his shoulders before leaving his chambers. He glanced at a framed photograph of his father, broad-shouldered, proud, smiling in his old district office before the night everything changed. The judge touched the frame lightly. Then he locked the door and headed for the elevator. In the lobby, he called his mother. She always waited for his call after hard days. "I'm on my way, Ma," he told her. "Just need to stop for gas." He didn't say anything about the case because he didn't want her worrying, and he didn't say anything about the feeling he'd carried since that morning. The ache of watching yet another family sit through yet another explanation of why their child's life ended through someone else's mistaken assumptions. He simply promised he'd be there soon, across the city. Kyle Brennan sat at his kitchen table staring at a stack of unopened mail. The envelopes formed a careless pile beside a single photograph of his daughter, who was asleep in a pink blanket the last time he saw her. He kept the photo on the table because looking at it made him feel like he was still part of something good. He had been living alone for 3 months now, ever since the argument that ended his marriage. His wife stopped trying to convince him to get help after she realized he didn't want to admit how quickly he was slipping. His apartment reflected the same denial. Empty fridge, half-packed boxes from a move that never happened, and divorce papers laid out on the table as if they were waiting for him to choose which line to initial. His phone vibrated every few minutes with debt collection alerts. $40 he didn't have, $200 he owed, $38,000 in total, a number he tried not to think about but couldn't outrun. A supervisor once told him that financial stress was the quiet killer of good judgment in police work. Kyle never believed him. But now, as he rubbed his temples and tried to ignore the pounding pressure in his chest, he wondered if that supervisor had been right all along. He reached for a can of beer, opened it with the kind of habitual movement that didn't require thinking, and took a long drink. The bitterness didn't calm him. It never did. But it filled the silence for a moment. He checked the time. He was already running late for the night shift. He considered calling in sick, but sick days were monitored now. One more absence would trigger a meeting he didn't want to attend, especially with a disciplinary file already thickened by complaints he pretended not to remember. 4 complaints in 18 months. 2 for excessive force. 1 for racial profiling. 1 for a hostile encounter during a stop. Each complaint left a mark he never fully acknowledged. Instead, he told himself the people filing them were exaggerating, or lying, or angry about something else. Anything was easier than accepting the truth. He reacted more with fear than with skill, more with insecurity than with training, more with instinct than with judgment. He stepped into the bedroom and picked up the photograph again, staring at his daughter's face until he felt his throat tighten. "Daddy's working late," he whispered, though she wasn't there to hear it. "I'll see you this weekend." But he wouldn't. Not this weekend. Not next. His supervisor already reassigned him twice for being distracted on patrol. His wife stopped allowing unsupervised visits, telling the court she needed to be sure he was stable. He told people she was exaggerating. The truth was harder to face. Kyle put the photo down and reached for his uniform. He slipped into it mechanically, buttoning each part with familiar motions. The uniform still made him feel like he mattered, like he belonged somewhere, like the world was ordered rather than chaotic. When he clipped his badge to his chest, he stared at it for a long moment. He wore it because he wanted to protect people. That was what he told himself when he graduated from the academy. But lately, he felt more like he was protecting himself from a world he didn't understand, from expectations he couldn't meet, from fears he couldn't admit. He left the apartment and locked the door, not noticing how dim the hallway felt or how much his breathing shifted as he walked down the stairs. He didn't have room in his mind for details. He was thinking about money he didn't have, a daughter he couldn't hold, a wife he couldn't win back, and a job where everyone seemed to expect more from him than he could give. He started the engine of his patrol car and leaned back for a moment. Eyes closed, hands gripping the steering wheel. The radio crackled with routine calls, noise, background, nothing that made him feel competent or in control. 2 men moved through the city that night without knowing they were heading toward the same moment. One of them, a seasoned federal judge, carried the weight of justice with a steady hand. The other, a young officer unraveling under pressure, carried his fear in ways he didn't recognize. One operated from principle, the other from instinct. One had spent a lifetime mastering the law. The other had spent 18 months trying to prove he belonged behind a badge that felt heavier every day. And neither man knew that the decisions they made in the next hour would collide, shaping the rest of their lives. When the dispatcher sent out the call about a possible stolen vehicle, Kyle answered without hesitation. It gave him something to focus on, something he could control. He didn't wonder whether the suspicion was accurate. He didn't ask questions. He didn't consider alternatives. He simply accepted the call because it felt like a chance to redeem himself, a chance to show he still had authority, a chance to feel steady again. He accelerated toward the location, unaware that the man he was driving toward was not a suspect, not a criminal, and not someone he could intimidate. He was driving toward a federal judge whose patience for unconstitutional policing had worn thin long before this night. He was driving toward a collision that neither man could avoid. And in that simple, Unthinking decision. The fate of both men, and a city already strained by mistrust, quietly shifted into place. Aaliyah Washington stood behind the counter, recounting the drawer for the third time because her mind wouldn't settle. She had been on the night shift long enough to know how to read people, or at least she believed she could, and that belief often came from instincts shaped more by fear than by experience. She kept glancing toward the man outside, not because of anything he did, but because she felt uneasy in ways she didn't know how to explain. She had grown up in a suburb where people spoke about safety the way they spoke about the weather, and she learned to see danger in places where it didn't always exist. Now, as she watched a man in a gray hoodie standing next to a car far nicer than any she'd ever been inside, she told herself she was only being cautious. She checked her phone and saw the group chat lighting up again. One friend wrote, "He's still there? That's weird." Another added, "If you're uncomfortable, call it in. Don't wait." Aaliyah hesitated. She knew what happened when people called the police on someone for the wrong reasons. She knew the stories. She'd studied them in class. But she also knew what her manager drilled into her every shift. Report anything that seems out of place. "Better safe than sorry," he always said. She took a slow breath, trying to sort through what was real and what was imagined, but the line between the two blurred under the pressure of the moment. She typed back into the chat, "I don't know. He's older. Looks like he's just talking on the phone, but he keeps turning around." Her friends responded instantly, pushing her toward action. "Call. You're alone. Be careful. Just report it and let CPD handle it." The certainty in their responses gave her permission to silence her doubts. That permission mattered more than she was willing to admit. She picked up the phone on the counter, but her hand shook just a little. She set it down, steadied herself, and finally lifted it again. She told herself she wasn't making a judgment. She was following a process. She was doing her job. Anything else felt too heavy to confront. She pressed the numbers and waited for the operator. Her voice came out softer than she expected. "Hi. I'd like to report something suspicious," she said. "There's a man outside, maybe in his 50s, wearing a gray hoodie, next to a black Mercedes GLE, the operator asked. "What's he doing?" Aaliyah hesitated because she didn't have a real answer. "He's just standing there," she said. "He's been here a long time, and he keeps looking around. I don't think the car belongs to him." The operator asked if the man threatened anyone or acted aggressively. "No," she replied, "but it just feels off." Those words, the ones rooted in feeling rather than fact, carried more weight in the system than she realized. The operator logged it as a possible stolen vehicle. Aaliyah didn't hear the term used. She didn't know how it would frame the response. She simply hung up, hoping she had done the right thing. But the moment the call ended, she felt something tighten in her stomach. She tried to shake the feeling, telling herself she was protecting the store, following protocol, being responsible. Still, she couldn't shake the sense that she had set something in motion that she no longer controlled. Across the lot, Judge Nathaniel Harlan stayed on the phone with his mother, trying to reassure her about something small she worried about. He listened to her tell the same story she had already told twice that week, repeating the details gently because she liked the sound of his voice. He didn't hurry her. He never hurried her. When she asked if he was tired, he said, "Nothing I can't handle. Ma, you get some rest." He ended the call with the same warmth he always carried, unaware that a 911 dispatcher had just sent an officer his way. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and looked over his notes from the case earlier in the day. Even on his off hours, his mind stayed in judge mode: arguments, facts, failures, outcomes. He replayed the hearing from that morning, Hearing the defense attorney argue aggression where none existed, and hearing the mother of the teenager try to breathe through her pain as the court considered her son's final moments. He wondered how many more parents he would have to see like her. How many more cases would come across his bench where fear and bias outpaced common sense and training. He thought about his father, about the night he died because someone mistook him for a threat instead of a man buying a snack after work. He wondered, not for the first time, how much had really changed since 1987. Aaliyah returned to the counter with a discomfort she couldn't shake. She replayed the call in her head, but now she heard how thin her details sounded. She wondered if she had overreacted. She wondered if she had misread everything. She wondered if the group chat should have been muted before she made the call. She told herself to calm down, that the police would come, check the vehicle, confirm everything was fine, and leave. She told herself nothing bad would happen because nothing bad needed to happen. But at the same time, she couldn't suppress a memory from high school, a moment when she watched a black classmate get stopped by police for walking through a parking lot at night. She remembered the look on his face, the shock of it, the humiliation. She remembered feeling both guilty and grateful that it wasn't her. The memory pushed against her now, growing heavier with each passing minute. While she struggled with her thoughts, the judge pulled out his wallet, checking to make sure his credentials were exactly where they belonged. Habit, routine. The kind of routine that comes from knowing the world doesn't always recognize authority when it's wrapped in a hoodie instead of a suit. He thought he would pump his gas, drive to his mother's house, and forget the day by sitting with her for a quiet dinner. He didn't expect anyone to intervene in that simple plan. But the call had already gone through. It moved through the dispatch system with a label attached to it that changed the nature of the response. And once the label was attached, no one questioned it. No one asked whether it came from bias. No one asked whether it came from uncertainty. No one asked whether it came from fear. They treated it as a matter requiring police presence, and that single decision, based on a feeling, not a fact, closed the distance between a federal judge and an officer already overwhelmed by his own life. Aaliyah watched the squad car pull in and felt her breath catch. The officer inside didn't hesitate. He moved quickly, with a posture she didn't expect, and she felt a sudden, sharp fear that maybe she had invited something much worse than she understood. She whispered, "Please don't let anything go wrong," though she didn't know whom she was speaking to or what she thought she could change now. Outside, the officer stepped forward with a level of tension that didn't match the moment. And inside, Aaliyah understood, too late, that she couldn't take the call back. She could only watch as two lives collided because of one decision she made in a moment of uncertainty. She pressed her hands together, wishing she could disappear into the floor, wishing she had trusted her hesitation earlier, wishing she had waited 10 more seconds before dialing. But the officer was already shouting commands, and the judge was already turning toward him with calm authority. And the world she set in motion was unfolding whether she was ready or not. Officer Kyle Brennan stepped out of his squad car already convinced a crime was unfolding, his hand gripping his weapon as if it were the only thing keeping him steady. He didn't pause to observe, didn't ask himself whether the man in front of him appeared calm or dangerous. He simply reacted to the label he carried in his mind. Possible stolen vehicle, black male, high-value car. He raised his voice before he even reached the pump. "Hands! Let me see your hands!" His voice cracked, betraying nerves he didn't recognize as fear. Judge Nathaniel D. Harlan turned toward him slowly, not startled, but disappointed in the intensity of the command. He ended his call with a deliberate calmness and placed the pump handle back in its cradle. "Officer," he said, "lower your weapon and explain the stop." Kyle interpreted the calm tone as defiance. His training didn't teach him how to respond to someone who wasn't afraid. He kept moving, kept shouting, because volume felt like control. "Step away from the vehicle, now!" The judge didn't move quickly. He moved carefully, with the measured steadiness of someone accustomed to diffusing chaos by refusing to feed it. "You have no reasonable articulable suspicion," he replied. The words landed with precision, but they only irritated Kyle, who felt the ground shifting under him. He wasn't used to hearing legal terms thrown back at him in real time. He wasn't used to a man standing calmly in the face of his aggression. He wasn't used to being challenged without apology. Kyle stepped in closer, his hand still near his weapon, his voice climbing again. "Possible stolen vehicle, license and registration. Step away from the car." The judge reached slowly into his pocket, announcing the movement the way someone trained for years around panicked people would. "I'm going to retrieve my identification," he said. "You will keep your hands visible." Kyle barked back, his body tense, his mind racing with every mistake he feared he was making but didn't know how to stop. The judge opened his wallet with clinical precision and held it where Kyle could see. The credentials didn't leave room for interpretation. Gold lettering, federal seal, full name, full authority. "Nathaniel Darius Harlan," he said, "United States District Judge, Northern District of Illinois." Kyle froze, his throat tightened, his mouth went dry. The judge didn't raise his voice, but the weight of his next words struck with finality. "You just conducted an unconstitutional Terry stop on a federal judge, on camera. Stand down. Officer Brennan, that is an order." Kyle's mind splintered in several directions. Fear for his career, confusion about how to walk this back, disbelief that someone like this could be standing in front of him in a hoodie. He lowered his gun by instinct, not by choice, his eyes scanning the badge again as if hoping he misread it. "Wait, are you serious? You're a judge?" The judge didn't dignify the question with more than a steady look. He simply reached for his phone and called for the watch commander. "This is Judge Nathaniel Harlan. I need a supervisor at my location immediately. Preserve all body cam and dispatch audio. Do not deactivate anything." Kyle stumbled backward a half step, breathing heavily, unsure whether to apologize, defend himself, or pretend the stop still made sense. He reached for his radio, his voice trembling. "Dispatch, requesting a sergeant, urgent, inside the store." Aaliyah felt her knees weaken when she realized the man she had reported wasn't a suspect at all. She covered her mouth, whispering, "Oh, God, what did I do?" As she watched the officer's panic grow, Sergeant Elena Ramirez arrived moments later, recognizing the judge instantly, her face drained of color. "Judge Harlan, sir," she said, struggling to find words. She glanced at Kyle with disbelief, then back at the judge, then at the body cam still recording everything. The judge spoke first. "Sergeant, I want confirmation that all logs, transmissions, and footage from this encounter will be preserved. I will be overseeing the chain of custody myself." Ramirez nodded quickly, her voice tight. "Yes, Your Honor, everything will be secured." She turned to Kyle, lowering her voice but not low enough to hide the anger in it. "What did you do?" Kyle didn't answer. He couldn't. He stood frozen, staring at the ground, seeing the unraveling of his life begin in real time. The judge didn't gloat. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply asserted the authority he carried every day in federal court. "Officer Brennan," he said, "you will remain on scene until instructed otherwise. Do not touch your body cam. Do not speak to the witness inside until directed. Your conduct tonight will be reviewed in full." Kyle felt the words hit him like blows. He nodded mechanically, his breath shallow, his thoughts spiraling through every complaint already in his file, every mistake he'd made, every warning he'd ignored. Ramirez escorted the judge aside to brief him on the officer's history. He listened without expression, though his jaw tightened slightly when she mentioned the 4 sustained complaints. He thanked her for responding promptly, but made it clear the matter would not end at the scene. Kyle retreated to his patrol car and sat inside, staring at his own reflection in the dark window, feeling the tremor in his hands. He pulled out his phone and dialed his father. The moment the line connected, Kyle's voice cracked. "Dad, I think I just pulled over Judge Harlan." There was a long silence on the other end before his father spoke. "Kyle," he said in a low, heavy voice, "you're finished. You are absolutely finished." Kyle's breath broke, his chest tightening as the truth landed with full force. He looked at the judge outside, standing with the calm authority of a man who had spent his life holding others accountable, and he knew there was no version of this night where he escaped the consequences. Sergeant Ramirez approached his car and ordered him to remain seated until internal notification protocols were completed. Kyle nodded without trusting himself to speak. He watched the judge gather his belongings, his posture firm, his expression controlled. The demeanor of a man who had endured worse than this and refused to be intimidated by the fragility of someone else's fear. As the judge prepared to leave the scene, he turned once more toward Kyle, not with malice, but with a quiet disappointment that stung more. "I hope," the judge said, "that someday you understand the weight of what you did here tonight." He stepped away without waiting for a reply. Kyle didn't move. He couldn't. The 7 minutes that had passed felt like the destruction of everything he still had left. And deep down, beneath the panic and the shame, he knew this wasn't bad luck. This was the moment every ignored warning, every uncorrected instinct, every fear-driven decision finally collided with reality. Sergeant Elena Ramirez stood stiffly beside Judge Nathaniel Harlan, trying to steady her own breathing as she assured him that every piece of evidence from the stop would be preserved exactly as he requested. She spoke with the careful tone of someone who understood both the gravity of what had just happened and the irreversible consequences already set in motion. "Your Honor," she said quietly, "the footage, the dispatch logs, the MDT entries, everything will be pulled and locked. I'll notify Internal Affairs myself." The judge nodded once, his expression controlled but unmistakably disappointed in the way the night had unfolded. He didn't raise his voice or embellish the moment with lectures. He didn't need to. His authority didn't come from volume. It came from presence, earned through decades of navigating crises with calm precision. Meanwhile, Officer Kyle Brennan sat inside his squad car, staring at his hands as though he no longer recognized them. His gloves lay on the passenger seat, forgotten in the panic that overtook him. His breathing came unevenly. He tried to slow it down, but the effort only made it worse. He wiped his face, realizing he was sweating despite the cold that had crawled into his chest. He replayed the judge's words over and over, each replay cutting deeper. Unconstitutional stop, federal judge, on camera, stand down. He felt the full weight of those words pressing on him like a verdict delivered before the trial even began. Kyle's radio crackled with a routine update from another unit, and the normalcy of it made him flinch. He felt like the world should have stopped for what he had done, but it hadn't. Everything outside his car continued as if nothing had happened. He leaned forward, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened. He whispered to himself, "I didn't mean to. I didn't know." But he couldn't finish the sentence because deep down he knew the truth. Meaning didn't matter. His choices did. His voice shook as he reached for his phone and dialed his father again, not caring that he'd already called once. He needed to hear something other than the silence in his own head. When his father answered, Kyle didn't speak right away. He sat there breathing heavily, trying to gather the strength to form a sentence. His father didn't wait. "Kyle," he said, "you need to listen. You cannot talk to anyone, not IA, not your sergeant, not your partner, no one." Kyle swallowed hard. "Dad, He said I violated his rights. He said. His father cut him off with a sharp, cold tone. You don't say a damn word about what he said. You don't explain. You don't justify. You don't defend. You're on video. It's done. You're done. Kyle's throat tightened. Dad, I didn't know who he was. That's not the problem, his father snapped. The problem is that you didn't follow procedure. You reacted before assessing. You escalated without cause. And you did it to the one man in this city who has the authority to make sure it ends your career. Kyle pressed his forehead to the steering wheel, trying to steady the panic rising inside him. I messed up, he whispered. Son, his father replied. You didn't just mess up. You ended it. Outside the car, Sergeant Ramirez approached the judge once more, notebook in hand. Your Honor, she said carefully, I'd like to gather a brief statement for documentation. The judge looked at her with a softened expression, recognizing she was doing her duty and likely terrified of misstepping. Sergeant, he replied, I will submit a full statement in the morning. For now, I am asking only one thing. Protect the integrity of every piece of evidence. No editing, no gaps, no failures in the chain. Ramirez nodded vigorously, almost in a bow. Yes, sir. You have my word. She hesitated, then added quietly, and I'm sorry this happened. The judge didn't respond immediately. His silence wasn't anger, it was exhaustion, not from the encounter, but from a lifetime of seeing the same pattern repeat across different faces, different uniforms, different nights. Sergeant, he finally said, I don't want apologies. I want reforms, and reforms don't happen from fear. They happen from accountability. Inside the store, Aaliyah watched the exchange with a sinking heart. Unable to turn away, she realized she had triggered this entire chain reaction, not because of anything the judge did, but because she trusted fears she didn't understand. She felt the weight of it pressing against her chest. She whispered to herself, I didn't know. I didn't know. But the words offered no comfort, because ignorance didn't erase consequences. She wished she could rewind time by 10 minutes. She wished she had walked outside and asked if he was okay instead of assuming he wasn't supposed to be there. She wished she had trusted the part of herself that hesitated before dialing, but wishing didn't change the call she had made. The truth settled on her slowly, closing in like a quiet confession she couldn't escape. She had made a false assumption, and the system took that assumption seriously. Too seriously. The judge stepped aside and called his clerk, informing her he would be documenting everything first thing in the morning. His voice remained steady, unfaltering. We are preserving audio, body cam, MDT logs, dispatch records, he said. I will need the case file prepped by noon. He hung up without ceremony. Kyle watched him from inside the squad car, the realization sinking deeper that the man he had stopped wasn't going home to complain. He was going home to prepare a legal earthquake. Kyle tried to breathe, but each inhale felt like a reminder that he couldn't escape what he'd done. His career, his pension, even his identity as an officer. All of it felt like it was slipping away with every second he sat there. He thought of his daughter, of the look she gave him the last time she hugged his leg before running back to her mother. He wondered how he would explain this to her someday. He wondered if she would even want to hear it. Sergeant Ramirez returned to his car and gave a quiet, firm directive. Officer Brennan, you are to remain here until the watch commander contacts you. Your duty weapon stays holstered. You are not to approach the complainant or the witness. You do not speak to them. You understand? Kyle nodded, barely audible. Yes, Sergeant. Ramirez looked at him with a mixture of anger and pity. Kyle, why did you jump the way you did? Why didn't you ask a single question? Kyle couldn't answer. Or maybe he wouldn't. Either way. The silence told her everything she needed to know. Judge Harlan prepared to leave, but before stepping into his car, he turned toward Kyle's vehicle, He didn't move closer. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at the young man who had pointed a gun at him without cause. "Officer Brennan," he said evenly, "the law exists to restrain fear, not empower it. I hope you learn that someday." Those words struck harder than anything Kyle's father had said. The judge got into his car without waiting for a reply. Nothing left to say. No anger left to express. Just a quiet ending to a moment that would reshape all 3 lives in the days ahead. 9 months later, when the civil case of Harlan v. City of Chicago and Officer Kyle T. Brennan opened in Judge Rebecca L. Goldstein's courtroom, the building felt more like a pressure chamber than a courthouse. The city had tried to avoid this moment, offering settlement after settlement, $5 million, $6 million, $7 million, but Judge Nathaniel Harlan rejected every one of them because he wanted the public record, the testimony, the accountability written in ink where no one could bury it. The first day of trial began with Goldstein, known for her cold precision, entering the courtroom with a presence that instantly quieted even the most confident attorneys. She took her seat and scanned the room, her gaze sharp enough to silence the whispers along the gallery. "Counsel," she said, "we will move efficiently. No theatrics, no speeches disguised as questions. Proceed." The city attorney rose first, attempting to frame the encounter as an unfortunate misunderstanding, the product of miscommunication rather than misconduct. Goldstein lifted one eyebrow, a gesture that signaled she was already unimpressed. "Counsel," she said, "stick to facts." The courtroom shifted its attention to the plaintiff's table, where Judge Harlan sat in a dark suit, posture calm, face unreadable. He was not just a plaintiff. He was a man who had spent decades dissecting weak arguments, and the city knew it. His attorney, a seasoned civil rights litigator, rose with a measured tone. "Your Honor, this case is not about confusion. It is about a pattern, documented, repeated, and ignored." When Officer Brennan took the stand on day 3, he looked nothing like the man who stepped out of his squad car that night. He had lost weight, his uniform replaced by a suit that hung too loosely at the shoulders. He avoided eye contact with the gallery, glancing only at the microphone in front of him. The plaintiff's attorney asked him to describe the moments leading to the stop. Kyle swallowed hard. "I received a call of a possible stolen vehicle," he said. "I acted based on the information I had." "And what information was that?" the attorney pressed. Kyle hesitated. "A black male in a Mercedes." A murmur passed through the courtroom. The attorney leaned forward. "Officer Brennan, did the call indicate a crime, a threat, a weapon, suspicious behavior?" Kyle stared at the table. "No." "Did Judge Harlan raise his voice?" "No." "Did he resist?" "No." "Did he threaten you?" Kyle closed his eyes for a moment. "No." The attorney paused, letting the silence settle. "Then explain to this jury what made you draw your weapon." Kyle's voice fractured. I was trying to be safe." Judge Goldstein interjected. "Safety is not a justification for violating constitutional rights. Officer, continue." Kyle's composure cracked. "I made a mistake," he whispered. "A mistake." The attorney responded gently but firmly. "A mistake with a gun pointed at a man who had done nothing wrong." The next witness was Aaliyah Washington. Nervous but determined to tell the truth, she admitted she acted on a feeling she couldn't explain, one shaped by fears she absorbed growing up. She admitted she didn't see anything criminal. She admitted she never waited to observe before calling. Her voice trembled as she said, "I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I didn't know who he was. I thought I was preventing something." The plaintiff's attorney asked her softly, "Would you have made that call if the man outside had been white?" Aaliyah's eyes filled, and she shook her head. "Probably not." The jury watched her wipe her tears away, the weight of her admission leaving her visibly shaken. On day 7, the city attorney attempted to salvage the case by arguing that officers must make rapid decisions to protect themselves and the community. Judge Goldstein leaned back slightly and addressed him with controlled frost. Counsel, rapid decisions do not excuse unconstitutional ones, and they certainly do not excuse a pattern of conduct ignored by your department. She turned to the jury. This court does not evaluate fear. We evaluate behavior. Her words landed with the finality of a gavel, when it was time for Judge Harlan to testify. The courtroom shifted. He walked to the stand with a deliberate calm, not using his authority to intimidate, but allowing his experience to guide every word. He answered questions with clarity, recounting the stop step by step, when the attorney asked why he refused earlier settlement offers. His answer came without hesitation. I wanted this moment. I wanted the truth recorded. I wanted the people of this city to understand that dignity cannot be restored privately. The attorney nodded. Judge, is this case about money? Harlan's expression changed, tightening at the mention of the morning hearing before the stop. I ruled on a case earlier that day, he said. A 16-year-old boy shot 16 times because he matched a description. I promised myself something that morning. I promised I'd never allow another young man to be brutalized by fear disguised as procedure. His voice softened but didn't weaken. I didn't file this lawsuit for myself. I filed it for that boy, for my father, killed the same way, mislabeled, misjudged, mistaken for a threat. The courtroom fell silent. Even the city attorney lowered his eyes. The trial moved with relentless momentum after that. Every witness, every exhibit, every record solidified the narrative. Unchecked fear, unchecked misconduct, and a system that looked away until the wrong person was stopped. When closing arguments began, the city attorney tried to appeal to the jury's sympathy, asking them to consider the pressures on officers. Goldstein cut him off with a tone colder than ice. Pressure does not erase accountability. Proceed properly. The jury listened closely to every remaining word. By the 9th day, both sides rested. Goldstein's instructions to the jury were clear, sharp, and mercilessly neutral. You are to decide whether Officer Brennan acted within the confines of the Constitution, she said, and whether the city of Chicago allowed a pattern of misconduct to persist. Consider the evidence, consider the truth, not comfort, not excuses. 12 citizens filed into the deliberation room, fully aware that their decision would ripple far beyond the walls of the courthouse. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and 42 minutes, a span that felt far longer to everyone waiting in Judge Rebecca Goldstein's courtroom. When the bailiff finally opened the door and called the jurors back in, the gallery held its breath as if the entire city were leaning over their shoulders. The four-person stood, hands steady, voice firm. In the matter of Harlan v. City of Chicago and Officer Kyle T. Brennan, we, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff. A single beat passed before she continued. Compensatory damages, $5.4 million. Punitive damages, $4 million. There was no sound at first, just a deep, collective exhale. Kyle Brennan closed his eyes and lowered his head, absorbing the words as if they were being carved into him. He didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't look toward the gallery where his father sat rigid and silent. Judge Goldstein thanked the jurors for their service, then turned her attention to the courtroom with the same unmistakable authority she carried throughout the trial. This court additionally denies qualified immunity for Officer Brennan, she said. He is personally liable for $750,000. Her voice did not tremble, nor did it soften. It delivered the finding with the clarity of a chisel striking stone. Kyle's attorney placed a hand on his shoulder, but Kyle didn't seem to feel it. He sat frozen, staring at nothing, understanding fully that this was the moment his life fractured beyond repair. Judge Harlan remained composed. Though the verdict did not bring triumph or satisfaction, it brought a quiet grief for the boy whose case he ruled on that morning, for the decades of fear-driven policing he had watched from the bench, for his father whose life ended in a similarly senseless encounter. His attorney leaned toward him. "You did it," she whispered. But the judge only shook his head slightly, answering in a low, steady tone. "We barely scratched the surface," across the aisle. Aaliyah Washington covered her face with her hands and wept softly. She knew she played a part in what happened, even if she never meant to. She knew she would carry that moment. The phone call, the assumption, the fear, for the rest of her life. And she knew consequences don't vanish simply because intentions were innocent. Her attorney touched her arm gently, signaling it was time to go. But she stayed seated for a moment longer, watching Judge Harlan rise from his chair with the same solemn dignity he displayed the night he told an officer he was making a catastrophic mistake. Kyle was escorted out of the courtroom by his union representative, who tried to whisper strategy, appeals, and post-verdict procedures. But Kyle didn't hear a single word. He felt a hollow ringing in his ears, the kind that comes when a man realizes there is no version of the future he imagined left standing in the days that followed. The city moved quickly. Kyle was fired immediately. No pension, no benefits, no grace period. The disciplinary board cited a pattern of conduct, a failure to learn, and an inability to safely perform duties. His home, already slipping through foreclosure, was taken within 6 months. He moved into his father's basement, working the night shift as a security guard at a warehouse where no one knew his history and no one cared enough to ask. He drank to fall asleep. He drank to forget. He drank because the silence around him grew louder every night. His father tried at first to pull him together, but even he eventually stepped back, unable to bear the weight of watching his son unravel under the consequences he warned him about. Kyle avoided mirrors. He avoided conversations. He avoided the news. Most days. He avoided himself. Aaliyah faced her own reckoning. She was fired from the gas station within days of the trial, both for the false report and for attracting the kind of attention no franchise wanted. She was sued separately for filing the 911 call under false pretenses. Her settlement, $45,000, wiped out her savings and forced her to withdraw from college for a year. She struggled with guilt, depression, and a growing awareness of how fear had shaped her worldview without her ever noticing. Therapy became part of her weekly routine. She tried to rebuild, piece by piece, hoping someday she could trust her own judgment again. She didn't look for sympathy. She didn't offer excuses. She just tried to become someone who would pause before making a call that could destroy another person's life. For the city of Chicago. The verdict delivered a message it could no longer ignore. $9.4 million, a federal judge's plaintiff, a public trial instead of a quiet settlement, and a jury that needed less than 4 hours to condemn a pattern of misconduct years in the making. Internal Affairs opened dozens of backlogged files within the month. Training protocols were rewritten. Supervisors were reassigned. A new audit division was formed for high-risk officers. And for the first time in years, the department faced pressure from both the public and the judiciary at the same time. As for Judge Harlan, he used the money not to enrich himself but to honor a name he carried every day. He established the Officer Darius Harlan Sr. Memorial Scholarship, dedicated to the children of fallen police officers, because he believed justice was not vengeance, and accountability was not hatred. He paid the full endowment himself and asked for no recognition beyond the quiet dignity of knowing his father's legacy would help others rise where he had fallen. He continued to serve on the bench with the same firmness and fairness he always carried. But colleagues noticed a subtle shift in him, a deeper resolve, a sharper intolerance for excuses, a gentler patience for victims. He never mentioned the night at the gas station in court. But every attorney who stood before him could sense that something in him had been sharpened. Not broken. 10 months after the verdict. Judge Harlan returned to the same gas station. He wasn't there for symbolism. He simply needed fuel. The same as any other day, inside a nearby cafe, Aaliyah, Washington, now working as a barista. Looked out the window and recognized him immediately. She froze. She didn't know whether to hide or walk outside or pretend she didn't see him, but he looked in her direction with a small, almost tired half-smile, a gesture that held neither bitterness nor forgiveness, just acknowledgement. Acknowledgement of what happened, acknowledgement of what it cost, acknowledgement that life moves forward even when scars remain. She nodded back, barely breathing, and he drove away without a word. The city would retell the story for years. Lawyers would cite it, officers would whisper about it, judges would reference it in training seminars, people would argue over it online without knowing the full truth. But the three people at the center of it carried the memory differently, quietly, privately, each one transformed in ways no verdict could measure. And somewhere in the middle of that transformation stood one unshakable truth. Fear, when left unchecked, costs more than any city can afford. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If it moved you, or made you think. Take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Leave a like. Share your thoughts in the comments. And your support will help these stories reach the people who need to hear them.